Make sure they're... Somebody in Richmond, let me know if we're back.
You're telling them just they didn't respond.
So that makes it easier.
Yes.
So, right.
Yes.
So, right, John. So if I wanted to add a button, instead of writing the JavaScript code, I write the jQuery code.
Okay, let's, I know some of you may not be finished with the first exercise, but I'm going to add on just a little bit. I'm going to show you the same concept with just another little function. So we're going to go fast here for about an hour, and then you're going to have like an hour to catch up, and it's like ask questions. You're not learning, like David said, unless you're breaking things. You really need to hit your wall, and I think to this point I've been watching you, it's like most of you is like, yeah, I can handle this, I'm all right, I got it all. You need to be pushing yourself. If you're not pushing yourself in here, you need to push yourself in the evenings, because this is a really compressed course. And the intent of this course is that we're going to expose you to a whole bunch of things, but you're not going to become an expert during the day. There are just not enough hours in the day. You're going to learn and become an expert by making your own mistakes and overcoming them. Or calling us over, and it's like, what am I doing here? Help me along. That's the value of this course for you. If I were you, run as fast as you can, hit that wall, call us over, we'll pick you up so you can run again. That's really what we're here for. So with that in mind, next thing. So we learned about HTML. That's jQuery's way of saying, I want a piece of the page, any indiscriminate piece of the page that you specify with this. By the way, this is called a selector. Selector, appropriately named because what you're doing is you're selecting something on your page. So we can use any CSS-compatible selector, including some of the pseudo selectors we touched on a little bit with CSS. So, what do I mean by pseudo selector? What do I mean by pseudo? In CSS, those are the little things that have colons on them. So, let's take a look at... Let's add a few rows to our table, and let's make every other row a different color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this, and well, we just said that we shouldn't have an ID more than once. So I'm going to change this to a class, because we're now going to have multiple first names. TR and the two cells inside of it, I'm going to copy that whole thing. Throw, I don't know, 5 or 6 in there. Save it. No magic. I'm going to go back over here to the browser, you know, just me repeated several times. Why did I do that? I want to show you something about pseudo selectors. So, by the way, while we're here, I'm going to come back in a minute. Sorry about going out of order. I'll show you the answer to the previous challenge. I'll come back and do that. For now, if you're getting the pattern here, and you learn some CSS, you can probably figure out what I'm about to do. So, engage. Think about this. What am I about to do? Here's the goal. I want to change the background color of all the cells in every other row in my table. Who can tell me the CSS for that?
Color background.
Background color, exactly. Now all I have to do is, that's the CSS property I want to set. Excellent. How do I tell it every other row? That's the hard part.
Set values for each row.
Not all of them, every other one. I can't hear you. Nth child, yeah, you could do that, but there's an easier way. We could do that. There are multiple positive solutions. I'm going to show you the easiest way because, you know, great developers often tend to be the laziest too because they write less code. So I'll show you another way. All of those are actually right. You could actually go and assign a different class to every other row and then say, I want to style that with this class. Perfect. But that's a lot of typing, especially if you've got 100 rows in the table. So another way is like, well, if it's every other, I wonder if there's a pseudo selector for even or odd. And and there's one for both. So all we have to do is figure out how to say every other row. So in our table, how do we say our table right here? Table ID of our table. Yep. And it's not the whole table, and it's not really, we want to get down into here. It's not the header rows. Remember that I've got that collapsed. It's not that one, because we don't want that. That's not really part of our even odd. We just want the data, not the header. So let's say T-body. How do we say something inside of our selector? What's that?
Will it be a colon, first name?
Nope.
Dot enter.
Space. Space means inside of there. T-body. Okay, we're getting there, you know, top down. Now, inside of the T-body, now we've got our rows. Just to show you, let me collapse a couple. So there's T-row, T-row, T-row. So T-row, and it's not really the T-row that we're trying to style, it's the TDs, because the T-row may or may not work because it's really the cell backgrounds that we're changing, not the rows. They happen to live in the rows. So the T-body, and then TR, even, that's the colon. Now, to change CSS with jQuery, once again, they give you a nice little function, just CSS. Brilliance in its simplicity. So Bethany already gave us the right CSS. Background color. If you want to get the background color, that's all you do. It's like, what is the background color? But if you want to set it, you say, I want to set the background color to I might as well show you a little bit about code formatting too. Because jQuery, you tend to stream things and it gets long, there's nothing wrong with pushing enter once in a while. JavaScript's smart enough to know it kind of goes together. It's all good until you hit the semicolon. That means end of that statement. So let me show you that that works. So if I had 1,000 rows in this table, with that one line of code, it would change every other row to that.
Because you put even.
Even. That's the magic. Did I write that even? No. That is part of our jQuery library. jQuery said, I'm going, and it's probably, because they're probably lazy too, if they're good, they probably didn't write that either. They probably leveraged CSS's ability to do that, because this is a CSS selector. So that's CSS. Now this is more complex. I mean, look at that. That is a selector. But that same selector will work for CSS or jQuery. Start thinking in that. It's like, I'm not going to go to each thing on my page and write a little code in the attribute if I don't have to. I'm going to put it in one place, and I'm going to specify the path to how to get there. And then I'm going to attach this behavior to it. I believe it was somebody who she was writing her JavaScript wrong yesterday because she was thinking this is the way it should work. She was actually writing her click events at the top as I want all of my buttons to have this click attached to it. That's the way jQuery thinks. jQuery says do it one place, attach the behavior. To that point. So let me go back. How is everybody? Any questions right now? Anna.
I have a question about the selector. So you always have to write out. So if you're just selecting every other row or equal rows, you still have to write out the R table T-body. Because it won't know that you're trying to get.
So the question is, do we have to specify all this stuff to get down to our TR even? If you just said TR even, what would happen if you had 3 tables on the page? I think it would actually work, but it would put all the TRs together, and I'm just guessing here. So if you had 10 rows in the first table, 20 in the second, it would actually put all those TRs together because it's just going to say, query, find all of them, and then I'm going to go to every other one. Computers are stupid. It's going to do whatever you tell it to do. So because we want to be very specific, only this table and only the rows inside the T-body. If I took this out, what happens? The T-body. I just deleted that.
The header will be part of it?
The header includes, because the header has a TR in there too, right there. So it's just going to count that one, which is no big deal. But usually you highlight you change the background of every other row in the data, not necessarily the header.
How come you have to put TD after?
Because TD is really, if you think about the background color, the row is more structural. It says, here's the row definition. The TD is what you actually see. That's where you put your text. I think it'll actually work. Like, let's try it without the TD. I don't know if that'll work or not. It does.
But if you had like your table row different color than your table
Well, it switches this.
cell, then
It
it would not do
switches
it.
color though.
So, Aaron, could you repeat that?
I think it switched which rows are colored.
That's because I took the T body out and I quickly just put it back. Yeah, because it included the one row in the header, and every other would actually move a little bit. Now, even, there's also an odd, you know? So if you didn't like which one it started on, change it. If you want to get more complex, I think it was Brianna that mentioned there is an nth. So if you want to say, I want to skip the first three and then go 2, 2, 2, you can do that. There's a selector for that, but those are the kind of things you have to go look up, because who often does that? So let me give you the answer to the first challenge. It was a micro challenge, but it's still a challenge. So the idea was, and this is probably going to, I know it's not going to work. Why is this not going to work anymore? If I just uncomment that, so I'm talking about that.
Oh, yeah, it's made it a class. That's fine.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I made it a class. Now, I've got lots of them. I've got, what, 5 different copies of it? What happens if I... Ooh, what's going to happen there? It's going to find multiple, and it's going to give me... David was talking about if you want to pass 3,000 variables to something, you don't want to pass 3,000 individual variables. You throw it into an object, or you throw it into, what's the other structure he taught you about? An array. jQuery talks about arrays. jQuery uses arrays to return, whenever it has more than one give back to you, it'll give you back a whole array. Then it's up to you to do whatever you want with them. So you see how all this stuff is building. Everything we teach you, there's a reason for it, because we're going to go on top of that. jQuery talks arrays and objects all the time. As a matter of fact, if I wanted to change CSS, we learned about objects. There are 2 ways to specify CSS. I know I'm going back and forth here, but so this is one way. Let's make sure that still works. So, yep, still works. And by the way, let me slow down a little bit. I'm very bad about, I used to teach an introduction to programming course like 15 years ago, and my students hated me. It was a love-hate relationship, because I would go so fast and they'd have to slow down, what are you doing? Same thing here. Please tell me to slow down. I'm not trying to do this to run away and not teach it properly. So if I'm going too fast, say, slow down, guy. You know, that's why we're here. So this is one way to write CSS. How do you write an object in just JavaScript in general? The squiggly braces. Somebody's actually back there doing this. So that's good. Exactly what you should have in your head. Squiggly brace. So I'm going to pass an object here. And I'm going to do that wrong on purpose. So I'm passing an object. But I've got background color. That's not how you specify a variable value in an object, is it? What's the right syntax? It's close. Change one character. Nope. Colon. Colon, yeah. So that will work exactly the same way. So why would I do it one way versus the other? Because this way, I'm not passing 2 strings. I'm passing an object. And why do we use objects? Because it's a big payload. It's like a big dump truck of data. So we can throw as much stuff in there as we want. As a matter of fact, give me something else we want to change on our every other odd row of TRs.
Okay. Red text.
Red text. Done. Something else.
Italics.
Italics. Anybody know the, well, you're about to find out. Text. Anything else? What's that? Bold. Font weight. Very good. Save it. Bang. So, very, very powerful. You've got, with one little statement, what do? We found what we wanted to change, which happened to be a whole bunch of rows, and we changed all of these CSS properties with one object being passed. Why would you use one version of this CSS method and pass 2 strings versus passing an object? How do you make that decision? If you're only changing one thing, just pass 2 strings.
Amount of data.
There are other ways. For instance, if somebody's not too cool with objects, or they're not comfortable, or they never learned about objects, they didn't go through this course, they went through another one. jQuery, here's another piece of the powerful aspect of jQuery. I'm not going to do all 4 of them because I'm lazy. What am I doing there? jQuery says, when you're dealing with a certain selected context, you often want to do more than just one thing to it. You often want to change it, and then maybe you want to pass it somewhere else or change something else on it. So this is what's called a fluent API. Fluent meaning that you can just, from the result of a function, it gives you back the original result. And you can just chain it. So I could have another thing here that says, and this is probably going to scare you a little bit. Could I do what?
Or is the line 11 versus line 10, comma versus the...
She wants you to change it to a colon, so.
You're absolutely right. Good catch. So, different syntax there. So we've got, what are we doing here? Find the selected context, change it. That CSS function is going to give us back that same thing we had up here. Why is it doing that? Because we may want to do something else with it, just in case. We do something else with it. What is this going to give us back? The same thing we had to begin with. Now what are we doing? We're attaching an event. This is going back to the person who wanted to do this before we knew how to do it. This says, when you happen to click on any of these things, I want you to do this. If I click on an even row, nothing happens. Odd row, yes. Now, I got way off the rails there. Hold on. Any questions?
Yeah, here's an interesting one. Since you can do all of this CSS in jQuery, why do you need CSS style sheet at all?
So the question is, if you can do all this in jQuery, why do you need CSS in general? Because CSS is its own thing, and there is overhead in running code. When a browser loads your page, what is it doing? It says, okay, I'm going to interpret your HTML, I'm going to interpret your style sheets, apply it, and then after all that's done, you have this document ready, which is why we have the document ready, and then it's going to actually run your JavaScript code. If you just did all this in CSS, it would already be done. We wouldn't have to write any code. Remember, we're lazy developers. I don't have to write code if I don't want to. And I might be confusing you. I consider JavaScript code. I don't consider CSS code. CSS is formatting. Any language that has an if statement is a coding language. Okay? So, no if statements in HTML, no if statements in CSS. Okay, the question was, why do I have to put .css multiple times? What I'm doing is I'm calling that function. It's just a function that somebody wrote that I'm using. Yep, it's a function that lives inside of the jQuery file that we just included. And what I'm doing here is I'm teaching you how to use the functions that exist in that file we downloaded. That's all I'm doing. Now, I'm going to come back to this, line 12 through 14, and think about all the other things that you can do with events. If you can write one little bit of code and attach it to anything on your page, willy-nilly, with selectors, think about the power that we've just unleashed. All those things you had to do by hand and writing the on-click and do this. Think about having to do that if you had 10 things that you wanted to, when you clicked on any one of these 10 boxes or divs, it does the same thing. Oh, that's a lot of coding. jQuery, one place. You find a selector, add a class to all those 10 things, select that class, .click, done. One place. Cleaner, less code. So, getting back to, I know I'm kind of all over the place, but let's comment that out. By the way, comments, here's two different flavors of comments in JavaScript. That's for a line. Anything from there to the end of the line is a comment. That's why it's gray in my editor here. And that's another style. That means everything until you see that is a comment. Comments were originally designed by the language creators as, it's called a comment because developers are supposed to leave each other's hints about, I wrote this because of this. Unfortunately, in the real world, we abuse it just like everything else we do. And this is often how it's used. You have old code that you comment out. We don't actually leave helpful little tidbits of information for ourselves. We actually show each other our old code. And why do we do that? Because if you comment something out like this, it doesn't run, but you don't have to delete it. So if you change your mind in 5 minutes, you can uncomment it and it's back. Now, what's the right way to do it? And I know Harper's over there hitting his head against the wall. It's like, we taught them Git on day one for a reason. Git is the right way to do that. You should delete it. Don't leave dead code, old code, because then it just, okay, I don't want to see your old dirty laundry. But oftentimes, this is real code. This is what it looks like. So the first challenge was this. Go find the first name, and I've changed that to, somebody help me out here. This should be old hat by now, but what does a dot mean? Class. Hash means ID. So go find all of the first names, HTML. You know, I don't want all of them because there are lots of them now. I want the first one. I think jQuery is smart enough. We're about to find out. Because that doesn't work in CSS. We found that out the other day. Yeah. So find the first one, give me its HTML. We're getting it rather than changing it because I didn't pass anything in there. If I put something in there, it's going to change it. So get the current value, and I want to, and I'm going to write this longhand to begin with. I asked you to change the value through concatenation. So current value, and y'all had a little trouble, I think, couple did with concatenation. I'm looking at you, Ballon. So it's easy. You can do whatever the current value was. I'm going to concatenate my middle name. So why did I put that space in there? Let's do it without the space, and you'll see. Computers don't really understand what you mean. You have to tell them every little character. So right there it is. We got lucky. Why? Because there was a little space in the browser. There was some white space, and it interpreted as, oh, that's what you mean. That's actually how it's often written. There was a leftover space, and I was lucky in seeing that. That's really what I was expecting to see. See how that's all smushed together? That didn't look very nice. So when you're concatenating, think about whatever you're concatenating to, it probably doesn't have spaces around it to make it look pretty. So you could do it like that, or you could do it like that, same thing. Okay? So that was the answer to the first challenge. Now, let's make this, let's ramp it up a little bit. You all know about input boxes. That's how you collect data from the users. So let's go ahead and I'm going to show you one more function that jQuery defines for us. So I'm going to put a new first and last name input box at the top, and when I click a button, it's going to add that to the table. So somebody's using my computer and I think got a virus or something. I got to reload Chrome.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
that one's on that.
Okay. Before I go on, y'all comfortable with the HTML? This is like, okay, get to the good stuff, right? So we learned very, very quickly about the click event. We need to learn how to get the value in an input box with jQuery. Fortunately, it's very, very, very similar to this HTML thing. So I'm going to comment that out so we have a big mess up at the top. And so we are going to get the value of whatever's inside of the text box named this and the last name corresponding. How do we select that? How do we find it? Step one in jQuery is selecting and finding what it is you want to talk about. What's the jQuery selector?
$.
Yep. And think CSS now. What's the pattern to find that text box? This one right here.
ID, first dash name dash text.
Yep, but how do you say ID? Hash. Okay, that'll get us there. Now, we want to get whatever's inside that. Very much like this, where it says HTML, it just val. So that is going to give us whatever value is in the text box at that given time. Okay, so that's going to give us the current values of each of the two text boxes, and then we're going to add it to the table. So we have to know where we're going to put it. So let's think about this for a second. We've got this table thing down there. Actually, I'm not going to do that for you. I'm going to show you, I've purposely done this wrong a little bit, so somebody tell me why these two lines, they're correct, but they're in the wrong place.
Because it's within the function. It should go above the function?
Well, think about when this runs. So the browser loads the page, it immediately says, oh, whenever I'm ready, I'm going to run this code. When the page loads, there's nothing in there. The user has to have a chance to type stuff in, right? Okay, so we got to wait for that. The way you say that in jQuery is, I already gave you the answer down here. I'm going to wait for them to tell me that they're ready. So we got to put a button or something on there so that they know, you know, I want to click that button. And I've already got a button here, name that. So when we click the button with this ID, we're going to do something. I'm not going to add it to the table. I'm going to tell you the function, because that wouldn't be fair. But I'm going to show you. Trying to show you the patterns here. So it's going to move that in there. So let me slow down and explain what's going on here line by line. So we have a button, and I gave it the ID of add to table. This is jQuery to say find that. Okay, that's step one. After you find that, what are we going to do with it? I'm going to call a function that lives in jQuery called click. That attaches the click event. Like when they click on this button, I want you to run my function right here. And this, I'm defining the function inline right here. This is what's called an anonymous function because I didn't give it a name. Something doesn't have a name, it's anonymous. So when they click on the button, that's when I want to go look inside the text boxes. Because if I looked in the text boxes as soon as the page loads, nothing's going to be in there. Now, here, I'm going to do an alert. And I'm going to concatenate the two. But what I want you to do, and I'll show you this in a minute. Is that going to be pretty, or is that not going to be pretty? Not very pretty. Why is it not pretty, Mudit?
Because there's no space.
There's no space.
Connect each other.
Yeah. So I need to put that in there. Okay, so when I click this button, here are the new things. The val. Now, what do you think would happen if I passed text to the val function? It puts a value in there. It replaces whatever's in there. Exactly right. So the pattern in jQuery is this. Just like down here where we said HTML. If you don't pass anything, it says give me the current value. If you pass something, it says replace it. So in this case, we just want to get the value. We're not trying to replace it. So let's make sure that works. So we got text boxes up here. Good enough. So what we want to do is we want to add a row to this table. And that's going to be a little bit of a challenge because you have to know HTML. You have to know what is a row, what does it look like. It's just text. For now, I'm going to add a little span over here just to show you what the syntax is. So let's put a little placeholder thing here. So right here, anybody know how to do a comment in HTML? They're trying to draw it out in the air. It's like, I know what you mean. It's this, yeah. It's the most verbose comment on the face of the earth. It's a lot of characters just to say comment. So, okay. And what do you know? Sometimes I do use helpful comments. So, right now, we're going to have a little placeholder div. And what makes sense to append to? I can just do it like this. So, output check. What I'm doing is I'm putting a little place in the page with a div, and I saved it, and you can't see it because there's nothing in it. But put some text there so you can see it. So it's right there. So what I'm going to do is when I click this, I'm going to take whatever's in there and I'm going to put it here. And I'm going to show you 2 or 3 different ways to do that. And then I'm going to ask you to go take the first and last name and add it to the bottom of the table. So do it with jQuery. You got to get into the mindset of how do I find what I'm looking for, and then which function do I call to do the work. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to put things right in there. First thing we got to do is find it. How do we find it? What is it?
It's our div.
Yep, it's a...
So the ID would be pound output check.
Exactly. So output check. And if you know it's only going to be one, you might as well just say div2, like that. Now, we have it. Now think about what do we want to do with it. Well, we know one thing we can do, and that's HTML, right? If we said this, it's going to put that inside of that div, right? Because we're passing, these are just variables. What types of variables are they? Strings. We didn't say string. JavaScript infers the types. It's a string because we got text back here. Okay? Push the button, put it in there. Now what we really want to do, what you're going to have to do with the table, and this is why I'm showing you this one, we need to add it on the end of it. We don't want to actually replace the text. So, okay? It will. The question was, if I did it again, well, let's do it. It'll just keep appending. What's even more powerful, and just start thinking about this. Think about all the opportunities of things you can do with jQuery. You know about loops now, right? And you can create whatever you want in HTML on the page. What if you had a loop in just like 1 to 1,000, and you had inside of there a little teeny tiny div or a little IMG tag with little dots, and put it in random places on the page with events. There's a mouse move. There's a hover. There are all kinds of fun things we're going to get into. But step one at a time, teach you the basics of jQuery. So what I want you to do now is use append to, instead of just putting it into this little output check, I want you to add a row to the table. Let's take about half an hour. Make sure everyone understands val, HTML, click, and append. Go to it.